So what is the level of need for sex therapy? Oh, well, I guess I should say, I did read on Advanced Psychotherapeutics that you were the only licensed sex therapist?
Certified.
Certified.
Yes. Licenses are state credentials. Certification is like anywhere. So there's also not many certified sex addiction therapists, which I am. In fact, the closest one is like 2.5 hours away.
Oh, okay.
So that's where I deal with a lot of the pornography and sex acting out in other ways and stuff, is more through the sex addiction certification. There's people who treat it,
right,
who say they do, but they're not certified.
Okay.
Yep.
So this would be great then. So what is the level of need for sex therapy and sex addiction therapy based on your experience here?
It's huge. Because number one, Christians haven't talked about it a lot, or if they do, it's in a negative context. And so we need people that's trying to help make the church a sexually healthy church. So that's kind of the preventative model and intervention of just trying to help people understand this isn't a dirty thing. God thought of it. So particularly within the Christian community, there's a huge need for it. And I would say 90% of the cases I get are Christians of sex therapy. And as far as sex addiction goes, there's a lot of people who say they do it, but they don't really know what they're doing all the time. And sometimes I get people who've been with other people and, inside I'm going, oh, I can't believe they were told that, or other things. And so I went through the certification process because part of that isn't just the training, which there's a lot of training. I had 30 some hours of supervision to get, so I was paying people to supervise my cases. Same with sex therapy. I think it was 50 hours of supervision, and I had to present tapes and do all this kind of stuff. So there's a lot to it, and it's definitely a need. Definitely a need. Not just for the addict, but also for the betrayed spouse as well, and for the couple.
Just generally, what are the most common issues that your clients come to you? What are they dealing with regarding sex therapy and sex addiction therapy? So what are the most common issues, and also what are some of your rarest?
Okay, the number one common sex therapy issue is desire disorders or related disorders. In other words, there's a discrepancy between how much he wants versus how much she wants. So that is probably the number one area. Second would be orgasmic disorders with delayed ejaculation, premature ejaculation, or female orgasmic disorders. And then I would say arousal, as far as men having erectile dysfunction. I don't see a lot of pain disorders, some, but there's a new diagnostic category that came out in 2013 that is eloquently called genitopelvic pain penetration disorder.
Okay.
It takes up two types that were used prior to that, and so they kind of combine them under that term. And so I don't see as much of that. I do get it, but often they need medical intervention as well, but the couple needs help. And like he's pressing for sex and it hurts her every time. It's like a knife going in. And so trying to help that sort of stuff. So those would be, as far as sex addiction is concerned, really the acting out has been all over the place. From quote unquote just pornography. Not that that is minimal at all. I'm just saying just that, all the way to prostitutes and guys who are heterosexual getting into homosexual sexual encounters, and animal sex. I mean, just everything you could imagine that they've done, as well as betrayed spouses. Beginning in January, I'm going to offer a group for the spouses that have been betrayed and just kind of work with them. I think it's a 9-week group I'm doing. And then I'm going to do an addict group at some point after that. So group therapy is one of the best ways to treat it. Treat both of them, because you get it normalized,
Yeah.
It's like, wow, that's the same thing I'm going through.
Okay.
So that's pretty much it. And sometimes sex therapy after I've worked with addictions. Now they need to learn how to have healthy sexuality. So I can combine those two.
How often do you see clients about issues of pornography?
Just pornography, or where pornography is also included?
Either.
Okay. Well, I would say right now, sex addiction is about 75% of my caseload. Just the nature of the beast. There's an epidemic. And I would say of those, 98% have pornography involved. Of that percentage, I would say 60% are quote unquote just pornography.
Okay. This is your estimate?
Yeah, it's an estimate based upon, like, I can pull up this year's caseload and kind of give it. So again, that may not be representative of everybody's experience, but
sure. Well, that's fine. I wanted to know about yours. So when a client comes to you with a porn-related issue, whether that be just pornography or in addition to something else, what goal, when they come to you, what kind of goals do they have in mind? Okay. And compare those to what kind of goals do you have for them?
Okay. Well, not everybody that looks at pornography is a sex addict. I think Dr. Phil once said, if you look at pornography, you're a sex addict. Not to ditch on Dr. Phil, but no, that's not the case. There's certain criteria that go with being a sex addict. So that's not always the case. Now, sometimes they come in and they don't meet criteria for a sex addict, but it's like, okay, you want to stop consuming it and looking at it, and that's been a struggle. So it's really usually help me stop, so I'm not using it anymore. And really the ones that come in who are sexually addicted almost all want the same thing. They want to stop because they know it's hurting them. They know it's hurting a spouse. And so it's like, I need to stop this. But they don't necessarily know that sex addiction is more than behavior. In fact, it's only partially behavior. Looking at consuming the pornography, sexual content is a behavior that needs to be stopped, but you've got to help them deal with the recovery, which, biblically we could call sanctification. Generally it's called recovery. But like sex addiction is trying to meet a legitimate need in an illegitimate way. And so you're wanting to help them identify what the legitimate need or needs are and how they could go about addressing those in a healthier way that doesn't involve, using something external like pornography or something else. Sometimes pornography is really people reading very graphic novels. There is no images per se, except what's formed in the mind.
So people are usually coming to you at once they've kind of come to a point, they've crossed a threshold and they realize it's harming them or harming someone else.
Well, I would say most of them have been outed. Their spouse found out in the marriage cases. Yeah. And so it's like, you're either going to go get help or we're done. And so that gets a lot of them in. Occasionally, I can't give you a percent, but maybe 15, they come in, it's like, I know I've got this problem. And in fact, I got a guy now who's single, and he struggles with sex addiction, pornography in particular. And so he's like, I've got to stop this. And so he's coming forward voluntarily. But usually the men's heels are being dragged, on the tile floor. You can see the heel marks. It's like, I don't really want to go, but I want to go. Yeah. It's just so scary because, like, what if I take a chance at this and I don't get better? What if it doesn't work? Because there's so much shame. So, yeah, most are found out.
What are the demographics of the clientele that come to you regarding pornography? Anything pornography?
pretty much everything. The oldest I've seen, 70-ish. Youngest I've seen,
70-ish.
Yeah, in the 70s. The youngest I've seen is 9. Various ethnicities, race, various genders. About a third of women, 30% to a third, are addicted to pornography, use pornography. So I get some of them, but they're the lower percentage. The vast majority of them are men. So really it is a widespread. Probably most are, for pornography, 20s, maybe into lower 40s. But it can, again, vary. A lot of college kids, because this is a college town.
Right.
Yeah, mostly Liberty kids.
Sure, it's a kind of bias the demographics a little bit.
Yeah, yep.
Okay, so getting into the subject of porn now, like any good discussion, can you start out by just giving me a definition of pornography and what you mean when you talk about it?
Well, that's the $60,000 question as it goes. Legally, they've had a hard time defining it. In fact, one of the Supreme Court members said, I can't define it, but I'll know it when I see it. Well, it's like, well, then there's got to be a definition for it if you know it when you see it. Christians have defined it in all various ways. Like some people would say the Sports Illustrated Valentine's edition model is pornography. A way I think about it isn't so much the content, like is there nudity or stuff like that, is it being used to generate fantasy and create arousal? So you could go looking at lingerie images on the internet, and in a way that's pornography because you're using it to give lust hits to the brain. You're using it for arousal and creating fantasy. Or, it could be hardcore kind of stuff, which most people would go, well, yeah, that is. So it's a very difficult thing to define. If a wife says, I don't like you looking at those images of bikinis on Google Images, then, it's a marital issue. Are you willing to give that up? And some guys can have trouble with that. So I can't give you like a neat definition for it, other than the fact of what it's doing to an individual. But because we can sear our conscience, somebody could be looking at a video of a couple having sex, all graphic, and not be aroused by it because they've developed a tolerance to it or they've seared their conscience to it. So those aren't as common, but it can happen. So, but most people, if they look at that, get aroused. Some get disgusted, but that could be a reaction to being aroused. They don't want to be aroused by that, but it's arousing material.
So would you say that the definition can be somewhat relative based on the eye of the beholder?
In the eye of the beholder, though there's some that are, I think if we had a committee, everybody would go, yeah, that is. So there
is an objective standard somewhere in the mix there. But
yeah, I would put, and again, this is argued art. Is a picture, a beautiful picture of art where a woman is nude, is that pornography? Artists would say, even Christian artists, no, it's art. But is it pornography? Well, probably some people would say yes, some people would say no. Or statue, where there's nudity. Is that pornography? Is it not? So it's really hard to put your finger on it and say, aha, that's it. We have a litmus test. And it's just not that easy. It's complex.
Sure. Do you think that there's any visual material, with statues, paintings, anything like that, or readable content that some may consider pornographic that you would consider art? Do you think that's possible? There can be something that can be considered?
How I view something isn't as important as how they view it and interpret So if it's bothering them, there's something in them that's being triggered by it that needs help. I'm very old-fashioned. I grew up in an independent Baptist church. I came to Liberty in the early days, where, if you pinky touched somebody of the opposite sex, you could get written up. I got written up once. We were in a revival and everybody was packed in, and so I had my arms up on the pew, because Thomas Road had pews in it back then. My fiance was there.
Is that the old Pate?
Yeah, not the Pate, but the other octagon one.
Oh, okay.
And so I got written up when I got back for having my arm around a girl, and I even took the dictionary down and I said, it wasn't like this. That's around. This is behind. I still got written up. So, some of the art, I think, is works like pornography, even though the intent may not been to create pornography. There's a picture, I can't remember where it hangs, of an artist made of this young maiden standing in this field. Kind of a very beautiful picture if you looked at it, but the title under it was Lost Virginity. So when you looked at that picture, you had to take her virginity from her in order to meet what the picture is saying. So it creates an interactive piece where if I don't see that, I just look at this beautiful girl standing in a field. But when I'm told that the title of it is Lost Virginity, I have to violate her in some way. It doesn't have to be me doing the raping or the partner, but I'm thinking about that in terms of her. And so some pornography plays out that way. So is that pornographic? I'd say so, even though there was no nudity in that picture, because it's forcing you to have to do something vile to that woman. So, yeah, I'm not going to be much help with you on that, because it, again, is complex and nuanced.
How does it make you feel that porn is so abundant that so many people are out there just viewing it?
Sad, grievous. I look at it that anything a client has done, or even somebody who's not a client, I'm capable of. And so raping somebody, I'd like to think I would never do that. But if it's in the human heart, fallenness and brokenness, it's in mine too. I just might been socialized and stuff not to do it. So I can't look down at anybody. I wish pornography didn't exist, but it's always existed in some form. And so it just makes me sad, because it robs people of joy. It robs people of intimacy, real intimacy, authentic intimacy. It degrades one's view of sexuality, seeing women as nothing more than the size of their breasts or just nudity. I mean, there's fetishes on sizes of breast or penises or all kinds of things. So it creates those kinds of cross-wiring that you don't want. And so, I was impacted by it. When I was a kid, a neighbor friend of mine brought over a magazine. I probably was 7, and he said, "Hey, look what I found in the basement." And his dad apparently had stashes of it. And he opened it, and it was a nudist magazine, a naturist magazine. So it was, black and white. You see him playing volleyball. It had very young girls. But I remember I can still see it vividly. Like a young girl nude, and they were all facing all the way up to an older one. So it's almost like you saw developmentally. It was like burned in. And I was like, I don't know what this is. I kind of like it, but it's like, huh? And so I knew something was off, in that I'm not going to tell my parents this. But that was the start of it. And then we would get catalogs from like JCPenney's and those kinds of department stores. And I'd be looking for toys to tell my parents what I wanted for Christmas. Came across the lingerie section, or the I guess underwear section. Noticed it, but it was like, something's good about this, but I don't know what it is.
What age are we talking here?
Probably 8, 9, right in there. Down to 7 is when I think I saw the naturist. But that burned it in me.
Teenagers was your first exposure?
First exposure. So it wasn't like a Playboy or Penthouse, but it was nudity. And so, you know, when you say to yourself, I know I probably can't tell anybody this, you're already talking about sexual shame. So, but fortunately, we didn't have the internet back then. You know, you had to go buy magazines. So I always had a buffer. Like, I'm not going to go buy it.
Right.
You know, I don't want to do that because somebody might see me or something. But it was still going on up here. The fantasy, the images. Again, I could see them today. I wish God could just click on them and take them to the recycle bin, drop them in, and then empty the recycle bin. So I can't pull them out. But it doesn't work that way. So my relationship to those images has changed. But it, you know, we have a biological drive for sex. We have a desire for connection. So it's really corrupting what is natural and God-given.
That first exposure, that nudist magazine, do you think that the curators of that magazine thought that their material was pornographic?
No, I probably think they didn't. Because they're nudists, and so they just see it as natural. But that doesn't mean that people that are in those communities aren't lusting after others. Yeah. But they're not going to say, yeah, I'm actually here so I can see people and lust, you know. I think that goes on as well, because I've worked with a few people that were nudists. Not in session, but that was a joke. But you could see some sexual issues definitely going on.
Where might someone today find porn if they want to go out and find it?
I told you I had the face for radio. Internet is just full of it, and you can find it without even trying. And so, you know, I remember my first exposure to internet porn was my daughter. She was very little, wanted to look up Barbie, you know, the Mattel toy. So I said, okay. So we were at my brother's, and I typed in Barbie, and, you know, an image came up. And so not an image, but a link, and I clicked on it. And that Barbie did not have a Mattel toy stamped to her butt. It was just a girl named Barbie, totally nude. And I was trying to shut it down because that's, you know, didn't want her to see it, but I didn't want to see it either, and trying to click it off. And back then, when you clicked something, you know, the X, it would bring up more pop-ups. And so it was like you couldn't click it enough. And so simply looking for something, whitehouse.gov is what we get to our White House, but there's a whitehouse.com that's all pornography. So again, even doing an assignment, students can run into this stuff. So pornography's that way. There still are magazines that people can find. There are still videos that people can find. Probably on Instagram, though I'm not typically on that. It's on a platform I'm well aware of, but I'm pretty sure you probably can. So everywhere, just literally everywhere. And that makes it problematic because it's hard to monitor it. You know, is it pornography if you're watching a movie and there's a sex scene in it? Is that pornography? You know, would you want your wife looking at that? You know, maybe so. Would she want you looking at it? You know, so some are going to call that pornography. Some are just going to say, well, it's nothing more than blocking for this movie and it fits, you know, the storyline. Others are going to say, well, it's gratuitous sex act. But you can argue it's pornography and what it's doing to somebody.
Well, you kind of answered the next question about how adults as well might run into it.
Yeah, same ways.
Without the influence of pornography, so just like in a perfect world, at what age typically do kids start thinking sexually?
Without any early sexualization. Pre-puberty, late pre-puberty, if they're not exposed to it on the internet and stuff. Very late pre-puberty, but more as they go into puberty, because that's where the hormones really hit, such as testosterone and stuff is much more released at that time. So that would be probably the normal time. But if you read Song of Solomon, which is an extremely erotic book, but anyway, if you kind of look at that book, it says like 9 times, don't stir up love until, or don't awake or stir up love till it pleases. That there is a timetable for this, and it's probably not 14 or 15 in our culture. It's much older. But if I just was going to draw a line, puberty is when I would say would be when most people are getting the urge and the chemicals to get interested.
But an exposure to sexual material might cause that to happen at an earlier age.
What it can do is the mind isn't ready for that level of exposure, whatever the exposure is. And what can happen is the images of pornography get fused, cross-wired with parts of the brain, so like soothing. So when I look at these pictures, I feel a calmness. I feel a soothing. I feel an excitement, which can also bring on a calming effect, actually. And so now it's like this is my method to go about trying to soothe myself.
Scary.
Yeah, but it's kind of the way we're wired. That's why we're not to be exposed to sexual stuff so early. But in this culture, and in other cultures, Western cultures particularly, it's hard not to.
So when that early exposure, you said it kind of like can cross wires and stuff. Those kind of effects can be long lasting throughout the rest of a person's lifetime?
It's like crack. Somebody can take crack, and the first time they take it, they are addicted. It's just kind of the way their chemicals and their neurons are wired, whereas somebody else might take it and just kind of go, I don't like it. But it is highly addictive. In fact, there's a guy named Robert Weiss who says that internet porn is the crack cocaine of pornography, because you can be anonymous on it, right? It's got anonymity for you. You can get on it accidentally. It's free, and so it's totally private. Nobody knows, and so it has all the makings of getting addicted to it. Where in my day, you had to go buy a magazine. That's much more risk than click, and there you are. So that makes it highly addictive, and you can find everything. For example, pornography in my day was pictures of nude women like Playboy, maybe a little bit more hard stuff like in Penthouse or Hustler, but not the kinds of things today people are watching, like a video of a couple having sex at some age or whatever, and then him withdrawing and ejaculating all over her face. That's very different than just looking at a nude woman or something. And so they're highly charged.
Some level of barbaricness.
Yeah, and animalist. I mean, if you really love of course most of these aren't married, but if you really care about somebody, why in the world would you want to do that to them? But porn makes it like, wow, that's what's exciting. That's norm. So, yeah, it's highly addictive.
Is pornography addictive to every viewer?
No, not to every viewer. But, it's not healthy to be looking at. But for a lot of people, depending what the pornography is, it can be highly addictive to viewers. Some people are going to be disgusted by it and really disgusted by it. Some are just going to, if Christians, for example, saying, wow, this is just how Satan has robbed us of the way, we're supposed to think about sex. But it's not worth trying if you can avoid it. But I don't think it's addictive to everybody. But it's not good.
What processes happen in the brain when someone views porn?
Well, there's a number of things. We have 3 parts to our brain if we kind of work our way up. Brainstem, which is, really low. It's our powerhouse of the brain. A lot of reflexes happen there. Then you got your midbrain, which is where our emotional world lives, our memory kind of lives, and then you got your kind of neocortex, which is kind of what we see, all the folds and everything, the gray matter in it. So obviously pornography, because it's designed to deal with arousal, is going to hit what's called the reward circuit, which goes down into the brainstem area and in the lower limbic system or middle brain. And what that does is it generates hits of dopamine, adrenaline, and it just feels so good. God gave us dopamine to addict us to things. Like cocaine causes high releases of dopamine, which is what makes it addictive. You go ride a motorcycle or take a roller coaster and you love it. It's like, man, I want to do that again. That's dopamine, and then that's good. But dopamine can also be released beating somebody up, shooting somebody, sociopaths and stuff can get released from dopamine. The chemicals in your brain do not care what is triggering it. And so, a spouse can trigger, dopamine. It can addict us to our spouse, so to speak. If that's the first person we're seeing nude, it's like, oh my gosh, but it's going to come from pornography and from all sorts of kinds of activities. So it hits that reward circuit without connection to a person. So that gets hit, and then what happens is that creates, and I'm simplifying this a lot, but that creates a craving for it. So you want to do it again, and dopamine gives us pleasure, but it also gives us the urge to seek out pleasure. So it makes us kind of crave it, seek it, search for it. While that's going on and we're consuming it, the brain is also releasing endorphins and enkephalins, which are our internal opiates. So if you've ever had morphine, like in a hospital, I had it once for a kidney stone, and it was so painful. And I remember them putting morphine in, and it was like this warm feeling up my arm, and I could feel it like washing over me. And when it was all in me, it was like, oh. Well, you're releasing that in, watching pornography, and so it gives you this calming feeling. And this is internal, God-given morphine. There's this calming and soothing effect that goes with it. So now you're getting high reward, tons of pleasure, and this calming that's occurring in the middle part of the brain. And it's like, well, how can anything that produces that stuff be bad? And so the thinker part isn't involved in it at all. And it's actually the brain bypasses it, because if you thought through it, you may not do what creates the pleasure and the soothing. If you can get that engaged and the whole brain working together, sometimes go, yeah, I'd like to look at that, but no, I'm not going to do that. That's not who I want to be. But that part isn't in what's being consumed. And what happens is when the dopamine is being released so much because of the hits, the brain actually adjusts structurally. So neurons create more places for dopamine to be released. Well, the more you look at something, the more desensitized to that you get. So now the brain is saying, hold it, we created more places for you, neuron on the other side, to give us dopamine, and now you're not giving us enough. We need something more graphic. So it's called tolerance. So now the person goes to another level of pornography, and then the hits come again. But then that becomes, desensitized, and on the cycle goes. So part of the addiction process is the brain getting tolerance over it. So there'll be guys, for example, who are completely heterosexual, but they'll be watching same-sex sex videos because their brain has got to the point of like, we need more. arousing. So the off nature of it, the shocking nature of it, the adrenaline that goes with it creates it. And sad to say, it leads some people to start seeking out child porn. Even more shocking, even more adrenaline, and they're not really that way. They're probably not going to ever abuse a child. They're just looking for hits, lust hits. Keep this chemical process going. But you're basically burning out your brain of dopamine and endorphins and enkephalins and adrenaline and things like that. So that's a simple kind of view of it. It's a little more complicated than that, but
short term. So when someone views pornography, what happens after they, like, immediately when they stop? What happens in the brain?
Pornography is almost never used by itself. A friend of mine says pornography and masturbation go hand in hand, because it's the arousal there, and women do this too, but is looking for an orgasm, an ejaculation. And so it could be that once the ejaculation occurs, now there's almost not like I don't want to look at that. And so there's the calmness from all the ejaculation and everything and the dopamine. And so they're kind of done with it. Some could be in a fog, but they're going to have that craving again and want that hit that feels so good. You don't think back and go, gosh, how I felt so bad after doing that. I felt like I let God down, let my spouse down, let my boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever down. That's not what they remember. They remember the pictures, they remember the activities, they remember what they can get out of it, and so it's called euphoric recall. They want back into it. Not the addict inside does, but the person's thinker up here is going, no, stop it, but it's not a loud voice to shut it off. That's why people will look at things that they never would, that disgust them when they get into recovery. I mean, I've had guys cry in my office for, I can't believe I looked at that. I can't believe I looked at that. Well, it was an addict, the brain looking for more hits. It's naturally going to do that when you seek it out that way. It's a grim thing. Yeah. It's sobering.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In what way is porn addiction similar to a drug addiction?
Pretty much the same, depending on what the drug is. It's got to hit, the drugs that are tied into the automatic nervous system, they're central mood-altering drugs. Those are working very similar to gambling, to sex addiction, etc. Whereas like LSD, PCP, pot, some, but not totally, they're more mind-altering drugs. So the mood-altering nature of like cocaine and downers and uppers and stuff, alcohol, it's very similar to. But it's going to hit different chemicals in the brain and in different ways depending on it. Whereas, sex addiction is the hardest because we're sexual beings. So it's tied into something we naturally are wired for in a healthy way. But, in food, very similar. You don't have to gamble. You don't have to take cocaine. You don't have to drink alcohol. You can drink water. But sex is just kind of who we are. And so even in a bigger, more powerful way, it creates more craving for it. But very similar to the mood-altering kinds of drugs.
Following that, in what ways might watching porn change a viewer's perception of others?
Well, it turns whatever the object of porn is into an object. You steal their personhood. You steal their image of God. And so, let's say it's males, looking at porn of females. So when you're around women, you don't think of them as your sister in Christ or, somebody who may have been sexually abused and had horrible things happen to them. You think of them in terms of their body and what it would be like to see them or have sex with them or whatever. So you end up sexualizing a lot of people. And you end up fantasizing as a result of that about certain people. So it impacts really seeing others through Christ's eyes and seeing them through a lustful eye. And that's just damaging. You know, you get to the point where a woman isn't a woman, she's a body. Rape isn't too far from that, is it? Sexual assault, sexual harassment, because that's all she is. Now again, the frontal lobe knows better, but that other parts, the mid and the brainstem, they've hijacked the other part of the brain, and so they're in control. So very, very hard.
Segueing right off of that question, how might watching porn influence a viewer into riskier behavior and potentially maybe to commit sexual crimes of their own?
Well, yeah, that's the tolerance effect. And so as a result of that, people look to escalate their hit. So, you know, let's say 2 beers, non-liberty approved, of course. 2 beers kind of relaxes somebody and they feel really good. Well, you drink 2 beers enough, now you need 3. You know, to get that same effect, and then 4. So your body is building up this tolerance to this substance. Well, your brain is building up a tolerance to whatever you're looking at. So yeah, it does set you up to do something that you never thought you would. There's a story of a minister many years ago. He got into recovery, but he was looking at porn a lot, and obviously as a minister, the shame associated with that. And he got triggered in a grocery store by this woman. And kind of back to the object, and so he ended up following her out and to her car, and then pushed her in her car and had his hands around her neck, and he was getting ready to rape her. Never had done anything like that before. And to take a line from the prodigal son, he came to himself and he thought, oh my God, what have I been doing and what have I done? Well, unfortunately, the police came and he was arrested and dealt with all of that. But that was an example of how watching pornography just kind of built up, and he was susceptible to that action. Where again, not everybody would, but he did. And you don't know if you're at risk for it. You know, I might think I can handle a hit of cocaine, but I really can't. You know, one, shot or snort and I'm done. I'm addicted.
In what ways might watching porn affect one's own sex life?
Well, there is something now called porn-induced erectile dysfunction. So that's one thing where a guy can't get an erection that's either sustainable, hard enough, whatever, without pornography. And so he's maybe having sex with his wife if he still can get an erection, but his mind isn't present because she's not as stimulating to him as the images are. Plus it affects a man and a woman, married couple is the context I usually use, where now it's like, it's just easier to look at the porn. It's less complicated. I don't have to think of anybody else, and I can just get off. And now my wife doesn't kind of provide that same level of excitement and desire. And so another issue is something that I've talked to a lot of sex therapists about this. Men are becoming less initiators. I'm going to say now probably up into the upper 30s, where traditionally 80-20 was the rule. 80% of men initiated, they had the high drive, and 20% of women had the high drive. And I don't know the statistics for it yet, but that number is drastically changing to where women now are like, well, Josh, my mom said that my husband's always going to want sex and we couldn't keep our hands off each other when we were dating, and now he's not initiating at all. Well, he's getting it off of porn. And so it affects the marriage in that way too. So it is really changing things. And then another way is what he sees in pornography he wants with his wife. So, pornography, boy, the girls take anal sex. Wants the wife to give him anal sex, and say, oh, that will really be important and help. And so she may capitulate, but it's really just capitulating to an addiction. And he's never going to really feel satisfied because it's not about a connection. It's reenacting what he's been watching. So people bring a lot of bad, unhealthy sexual activities into their marriage that really wouldn't have been there had it not been for pornography. In fact, when I used to do marriage retreats a lot, on this, I had where they could, well, I still do them, but going back, I would have them fill out 3x5 cards with some questions on it anonymously. You know, they could kind of drop into the box, and I had a few always in there. But the number one question I would get was, is oral sex acceptable? Is it like on the approved list that God would go, yeah, that's good. I stopped getting those, and now it's anal sex. Is anal sex okay? Well, where did people come up with that? Pornography. So again, it's changing expectations. Women are supposed to swallow semen. Well, that's what they do on the movies. You know, I know I'm just rambling, but there was a story, or my daughter was watching a TV show, Tara Banks' talk show many years ago, and I came home and I noticed that what Tara had on was porn stars. So I was naturally...
She had some there on the show, or this was just a
talking show. Okay. Yeah, so these were the guests that she was talking to. And a couple of them were married, and this one, who apparently was a well-known person, but she was asked, is sex with your husband the same as sex with these guys in the videos? And I'll never forget, she went, no! Like, that's the stupidest question I've ever heard in my life. But guys are thinking, if I had her, that's the way it would be. So they're creating a fantasy that's not realistic, and yet people are wanting it to be realistic. And that's destroying marriage. Big time.
Is there ever an instance where you would recommend pornography?
Never, ever. Nope. You're bringing in another person, actually more people, into the bedroom by doing that. And so the couple needs to create their own eroticism, and that's what, as a sex therapist, I try to help them do, to where they have such a body, soul, and spirit connection that the eroticism arises out of that, arises out of agape love. And so they don't need that stuff. They don't need toys and stuff. Not that they can't use certain things like that. It's just not necessary. Where pornography creates things that have to be there. And by the way, another thing pornography, internet has done, is it's turned the average person into a porn star. Because people are putting their videos on, and so now they're kind of creating an exhibitionist sort of experience where, you know, this neighbor next door you would have never seen do something like this. Now they're posting their own stuff because there are sites for that. And another one that I've dealt with a few times, girl, it's always been the girl, woman, is really encouraged by the husband to pose and take nude photos, or, you know, nude photos or nude videos of them having sex or her masturbating or something. And then in one case, a guy was having an affair. She found out about it and said, stop or I'm leaving. He says, if you leave, you will regret it. She left. And then he took all of those pictures and video and sent it to every one of her friends. And at workplace. Revenge porn. And, you know, the absolute horror of that for her. Yet she was doing it for her husband. And within a healthy marriage, a guy would never have done that, you know, if he did do pictures. But pornography makes it all about the high. And yes, that was revenge porn.
Yeah.
Isn't this an encouraging talk? Jesus loves us in spite of this stuff.
In regards to porn and culture, why might you consider the viewing of pornography a societal norm?
Well, because our society has become so... pornography is an epidemic. Even I think the CDC said that. And so it's just norming stuff that, again, is not really normal. It's giving myths and misconceptions the things. People are moving away from what healthy sexuality is because they think it's in the sexual highs and the outcome of these sexual encounters, not in a relationship. It will never satisfy. So I think that's the biggest one. In society, even the Diagnostic Statistical Manual is normalizing alternative sexual choices to where they don't necessarily see that as a problem. If you want to have pornography in your, part of your sex life, then sure, by all means, go ahead. If it's fulfilling, that's the standard. Well, may make them temporarily satisfied, but what is it doing on the long haul? So yeah, it's a huge problem.
Kind of a hedonistic view when looking at it.
Oh, very much so. Yeah.
So would you say that pornography is generally accepted by our society?
Well, that's a hard one. Some things, maybe the general, broader things, yes. Some of the harder kinds of porn, no. I think the average person is like, no, that's just wrong. Watching porn with an animal, gosh, that's terrible kind of thing. But when you get hooked, the tolerance leads you to where you'd be doing that. And so they're like, how could you choose to do that? Well, they didn't jump to it. They progressively moved toward it. So I would say, to like sex in movies and maybe some skimpy dressing of models and stuff, people probably like, well, that's no big deal. I think it is, but they might think that. But the harder stuff, again, no, that's not okay.
In regards to the lighter stuff that you said, that's kind of maybe a little bit more, generally people are a little bit more open to and stuff, that kind of stuff. How does this influence the frequency in which people are watching porn, or people are starting to watch porn?
The softer stuff, or
just the marketing campaigns that are maybe a little more racy, or stuff in movies. Just the general normalization, I guess, as to like some soft.
I don't know if how much that does that. For example, the average age now for viewing porn, it's been going down over years, is 9. Some say 8. So that's the age of it. And once that happens at that age, it is pretty much going to follow you. I have dealt with a few people who went to college and somehow or another got exposed to it at that age, so 18, 19, and then they got addicted. But I don't know that, society normalizes things, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to go to the next level. So I don't know. That's a sociologist's question, I think.
Okay.
Sex addiction as a whole is getting more press, and I think people are beginning to understand it more, particularly in the church. And so in that sense, it's, I think, helpful to give insight to people. But I don't know about society, if that would be true or not. Just I remember a couple of cases where guys that looked at pornography would also look to take some peeks. So if a woman bent over to do something, they're trying to look down their shirt, kind of thing. And it's that, again, objectifying. So sometimes porn, that might lead to porn, that might come out of porn. It just depends on the individual's process. So
okay.
That's not a great answer to your question, but.
What should parents know about porn?
So you want to know what parents should know about porn. They should learn that their kids are going to see it. No matter how hard they try, they're going to see it somehow, some way. So first of all, you can't really protect them from getting access to it. They can get it accidentally today as they did back in my day. So they should know that. Number 2, you're going to, best prepare your kids for it by teaching them about sex at the youngest possible age. And it's a progressive dialogue question. It's not one they hit pre-puberty and now we're going to have the talk. It's way too late after that. The talk is talks that need to happen throughout development, and that's going to help, again, with the porn. Third, I would say, is not to shame your child over using pornography or finding it on their computer or something, but to have dialogue about it. I heard a great story. I wish my dad had done this to me. Father found a magazine that the son had. This wasn't all that long ago, but the kid just happened to have a magazine. And so he told his son he wanted to talk to him, went into his bedroom and said, Mom found this. And of course, terrible shame and stuff came over him. And he said, this stuff is pretty appealing, isn't it? And son nodded. He said, I found it appealing. Said it's still kind of appealing to me. So he's normalizing it for the kid. He said, but you know what this does? It makes you look at women differently. And so he went through kind of a discussion of all the reasons why pornography isn't a good choice. And he said, son, this is the best part. I'm going to leave you this magazine. It was yours. And it's up to you what you're going to choose to do with it. Sometime later that evening, the son came in and handed his father the magazine and said, I don't want that. What a beautiful way to help somebody think through it and make the choice, not just you know, terrible person, or I'm going to throw that in the garbage, so much sexual shame. That's a way to make sure your kid is going to be addicted to it. So how you respond to this when you find it out needs to be a casual conversation about it. And, what do you like about it? So not to shame. That if there's only one thing they do, that's the big one. But also letting them know the downsides to it. So it's not just, here, it's your choice. So they got to know the downsides to it. So parents need to do their homework a little bit. You can bring up the conversation at a certain age, 7, 8. Have they seen stuff like that? Normalizing it. It's so common today. It's sad, but it's so common today. Have you had something pop up? So doing that as well. I think it goes without saying to pray for your kids. Samuel, in the midst of a terrible culture at that time in Old Testament, with Hophni and Phinehas, Eli's, sons, having sex with, women at, coming to the temple to worship. Samuel lived a godly life. So it wasn't like, well, this culture is so bad, who can? Well, back then, they still had issues, and you can lead a godly life in a lousy culture. And so to prepare them for that. So that would be probably my number one advice, or not number one, but my series of recommendations. For parents, there's books out, Stanton Jones, and I think it's Brianna Jones. He's a psychologist at Wheaton. I don't know what her background is, but they wrote a book talking to your children about sex. That's excellent. And then they have these books that are for certain ages, and they're like little tiny books. And for the child. So it's like you're reading a father talking to his kids about sex at a certain age. And so it goes right on up, into teenage years, the different books, or some other book, but to know how to talk to your kids, to get informed, and to be able to provide that training throughout. Healthy sexuality is the answer to understanding why not to do porn. So by teaching them what's good about sex, makes what's not so good about sex less appealing.
Are there any other resources that you would suggest to parents who wants to go and educate themselves about the topic? I know you just listed those books, but as far as just the general idea of
there's some
discourse.
There's some good books on healthy sexuality. I think that they should kind of read. A book that I love, it's going to be rewritten with new title soon. I'm not sure what he's going to retitle it, but it's called Soul Virgins right now. And so it's designed for college kids, but I think if parents read that, they become familiar with kind of God's economy on sexuality and sex. And so it helps them be better equipped on how to approach it with kids. So that would be one. In fact, I use it in my human sexuality class. I had a 70-year-old woman come up to me crying and saying, I wish I had this book 45 years or 50 some years ago. She said what a difference it would have made. So if a 70-year-old woman is recognizing how important it is, parents, should read something like Soul Virgins. God's Gift of Sex by the Penners is an excellent book. There is a book called Wired for Intimacy that most of the book is really good. The last part of the book isn't necessary, but it talks about how our brains are affected by pornography and other kinds of things. But to understand, it's intimacy we're really required for, designed for. So just to find some really good books to have a good understanding of healthy sexuality. Reading porn books is going to be somewhat helpful, but it's just going to really talk about the problem and not get deeper into it. John Cusick wrote a great book, if somebody wanted to, called Surfing for God. Like surfing the internet, what they're really looking for is to fill the hole that only God can fill. It's a really good book. So there are some out there, but I would start with learn healthy sexuality. Start having the conversation.
Okay. Well, yeah, nice and simple. Would you recommend to every parent that they familiarize themselves with the porn issue, regardless of the gender of their child?
Absolutely. Again, a third of girls getting addicted to it now. More than stories. I mean, image. They're becoming more visual, which wasn't the case, in the early 90s and before.
Girls are becoming more visual.
Yep.
So I know you said that there's really nothing you can do to shield your child from the exposure of pornography. But should parents try to make an effort anyway? Or
sure. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm a big believer on having blocks to certain sites on a computer, so using some of those softwares that are out there is helpful. They now have those kinds of things for smartphones that can be, block access to pornography. The older the kid gets, the more he's going to know how to get around that, but they do work for somebody that really wants to avoid it. And I would do it as a parent. In fact, I did it as a parent, just to kind of limit access. They can still get it, but I'm making it more narrow for where they have to go to get it. So I would do those things. Again, the conversations about it, I think, are critical. Not to shame them about it, to talk about why pornography is appealing, because it is for most people, because it's hitting our design and nature. So yeah, they should do all those things, but knowing that it's not a statement on their parenting if their kid finds it. It's like leaks everywhere, and you're not going to be able to block each leak. Water's going to get in.
Seems like some parents take it as like a disrespect to them that their kid does that. Like,
yeah, it needs to not be about them.
It's a really angry thing with the onset of that knowledge.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm saying. Parents need to be informed and not see it in terms of anything, but this kid is in culture, and this is what he's going to encounter, and I need to prepare him for it. Doesn't mean anything on my parenting, skill or prowess. Now, it could, depending on how they're parenting, but by and large, it doesn't. It's just simply, this is what my child's going to get into. I need to prepare him. Like stranger danger,
Yeah.
But, I tell parents, it's not just stranger danger. Uncle Bob could be the danger. Jim next door could be the danger. So, you have to also help them understand it's not just strangers that do this.
Do parents make good accountability partners?
No, I don't recommend that. I recommend somebody like a youth pastor or some older kinds of kids, like Big Brother, that are good, godly kids that you can trust as much as possible and you vetted as much as possible, to be more the accountability. If somebody's 12, they're probably not going to open up to other 12-year-olds about that problem very well. 18-year-olds, very different. So I don't think parents should be accountable. I think dad, if it's a boy, mom, if it's a girl, should really work on having dialogues and discussions about it, ongoing, but not to see it as, this kid's got to tell you that stuff. You want to create relationship. So I would never make it to a child. Now I know some people would disagree with that, but I just think it creates shame, so much shame. If they go to mom and dad, that's fine.
Should a parent approach their child to ask to get an update about their child's experience with porn?
If they know that they already have, I think that's okay. But I would present it not as, tell me about how you're doing with that. I would put it within the context of a relationship where there's dialogue. And then it will allow the child to feel safer talking about it with them. But I don't think it should be, like a harsh thing, is what I was saying earlier. So yeah, I think that's okay. And again, to me, the answer is healthy sexuality is going to help with that. I'll give you a personal example. When I was in youth group, I was struggling with my thought life. I had a school of 2,000 in high school, 500 in my class, and lots of good-looking women back then. Maybe 2% of the school students were saved, and so just not a great group. Well, I was having these, what I thought were lustful thoughts, and I was hearing at church, that's bad, that's evil, all these things. I went to a youth worker, and he was single at that time, and probably in his 30s. And I said, Mr. Brewster, I'm having a hard time, and I was just stumbling over this, with my thought life. And he went, that's sin. And then I got a 5 to 10 minute, though it felt like 3 days, lecture about it. Then he put his arm around me and prayed, which is good. And off I went. So Monday morning, I'm walking down the hallway, and I go, oh, God, I am so sorry, I'm lusting again. Really, it was attraction. But nobody told me it was attraction, because I had this little stuff from the early pornography. So I came here to Liberty in the early days, and there was a tent basically right in this area of where DeMoss sits. That was where our big classes was. That was the Vine Center back then. And I was a missions major, the males had a meeting with Pastor Falwell. And he got up there and we could ask him anything we wanted. And so some guy, thank God for him, went up there and said, Pastor Falwell, we're a bunch of guys in here. I love it that it's just a bunch of guys. I struggle with my thought life and I don't want to deal with that. And I'll never forget what he said. I can even see him saying this. Men, if you're not having trouble with your thought life, go to the counseling center. And it was like, what? I'm bad Christian for this stuff. And Pastor Falwell is saying it's normal? Oh, if I had only got that message early, what a difference it would have made, because it would have taken away so much shame. But man, I had so much shame over it. And so I had to work out of that. It just was, even though hearing that, it didn't erase, because the shame was wired in before Mr. Brewster, but certainly afterwards. It was even worse, because I wanted to be a godly guy, but I saw a beautiful woman and I thought about her. Such evil. But I didn't know. He said, oh, you're going to be attracted to women. So I just grateful for that thing. I think God set it up for me and me alone, but probably not the truth.
So people are going to be reading this story, potentially watching a video where they're going to read your words or hear your words in this article or this thing we're going to publish called "What Parents Should Know About Porn." Do you have anything that you would like to say directly to them?
To the parents?
Directly to the parents who would read your material that I'm recording here.
One thing I'd say is you're not just a godly young man or addicted to sex, or a pervert, or whatever words you want to use. You can be godly and struggle with pornography. And to understand that is so important, because if you want to think about it, can you be a godly person and gossip? Well, I think even though gossip is a sin, we would say, well, that doesn't make you ungodly, but it's a sin. Or be a godly person and lie. Research says the average person lies 15 times a day. And so we don't write off those as Christians. Christian nature is to struggle. It's to sin, unfortunately. And pornography, being in the culture the way it is so readily accessible. And that's a problem. But don't let your child think they're a bad person, they can't be a good Christian if they do that. You can be both. I call it the ampersand. In fact, I've got ampersands in my counseling office, even here, to remind me that we live in andness, not orness. And so just approach your kids so lovingly and caring-wise. Put your arms around them. Let them know, again, that this isn't good stuff. It's bad stuff. It's virus to our souls. But it's an easy virus to get exposed to, and it's an easy one to get become contagious. So let's love them. Remember how God sees them. Romans 5:8, but God commanded, and Romans 5:8 says, but God commanded his love toward us in that while we were yet sinners, he died for us. It wasn't while we were doing pretty well without him, he died for us. When we were at enmity with him, when we were not living in terms of redemption, he died for us. Well, be willing to see your child as worthy of God's blood and redemption, though none of us are worthy. Since he's given it to us, that child is worthy of it too, regardless of what he or she has done. So just extend to them love, give them healthy sexuality information, and you go a long way into helping your child maybe stave off pornography, or certainly begin to get a better feel about why that wouldn't be a good choice for them. God bless.